Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Abilita Advantage webinar. It's in Abilita's DNA to focus on our clients' needs with bottom line results. And we're thrilled to have you here as we dive into important technology solutions that'll help your business or your organization stay ahead. So today we're tackling a topic that's on most IT directors' minds as of lately. What's the difference between moving the phone system into the cloud, which is commonly known as Unified Communications as a Service or UCaaS, or even Contact Center as a Service, CCaaS, and using Microsoft Teams or similar technology for the phone system? And, maybe just a few years ago, telecom gurus would scoff at the idea of Teams for voice, but as of lately, many have straightened up and taken notice of its improvements. So today we have Thea Rasmussen, who's a subject matter expert, which GTS has helped us line up and here to guide us through this pressing topic. I think you'll find her content extremely well done, and you'll want to get the slide deck when we're done with this. And just a reminder that you'll be getting a $25 gift card for DoorDash, which will be emailed to you after this meeting. So finally, please ask your questions at any time. She's open to you asking the questions. You can come off mute or you can just chat it in there. This call is going to be recorded, so you can turn off your note takers and please mute, and also turn off your video when Thea gets started. So take it away, Thea.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Dan, and thanks all for joining us today. Appreciate you being here. As Dan mentioned, I'm Thea Rasmussen. I'm Director of CX Strategy. I've been in the industry for about 18 years or so, and I've worked for a combination of suppliers and distributors prior to becoming more consultative, which I've been doing for the last 2 years. During my time in the industry, I've held a combination of pre-sales engineering and architecting positions, as well as some strategic director and leadership roles in technology in this space. So inclusive of UCaaS, Contact Center as a Service, or CCaaS, collaboration, and now more than ever, CX and AI as well, and some of those newer technologies with conversational, Gen AI, and now agentic. So what we're here to discuss today, as Dan mentioned, is really how to navigate through the unified communications as a service landscape. So I'm going to be providing you my take on the market, and we're going to be outlining the different flavors and categories as I see them in the UCaaS space, and helping you determine why to buy what and when. And then we're going to double click into that Microsoft Teams environment, as there's a variety of different options and ways to consume that, pros, cons, etc., and make those considerations in what's available in that very rapidly growing space. So with no further ado, let's get started. And then let me know, Mandy, Dan, if there's any questions, or feel free to just interrupt as well. So we're going to start with the evolution of UCaaS. How did we get here, and when did it start, and why? So UCaaS came about in the early 2000s, and it was really focused on voice only at that time. It was designed to replace premises-based PBX equipment and move that to a multi-tenant environment in a cloud structure. So I don't have to do maintenance or upgrades or have people managing that on site. And it became much more accessible to not just technical leaders in the business. They then expanded over the next decade into integrating messaging and collaboration tools, as well as video, and then also mobility to get people out of the office as well and onto their mobile devices while still being connected and tied back to the business phone system. Now, where we are in the 2020s is all of the AI and API-driven enhancements. So very focused on what it can do for us from an optimization perspective, but also what can it integrate to that we're already using today, which is going to be a big part of the conversation. Now, when I look at the industry, I see UCaaS in 3 different buckets. You have your pure UCaaS players, where they're really specializing in UCaaS, many of them also contact center as well. And that's really what they do, and that's all they do, and they do it well. Then you have your yes and providers, where voice is an additional offering to them, and we'll cover what that looks like as well. But they predominantly do maybe a variety of different things. You might get this through a value-added reseller or a network provider, et cetera. And many times they end up reselling those pure UCaaS players or building something custom from the ground up with an open source model. And then we're going to be spending some time in this third bucket, which is really enabling the collaboration tool for voice that your organization is already using. So many times you have some sort of internal chat or collaboration tool. The three big ones on the market right now are, of course, Microsoft Teams, WebEx from Cisco, and Zoom. So we'll talk about those three from a collaboration perspective. So starting out with the pure play UCaaS players. These are some, but not an exhaustive list of the players in the market, some that we see more activity with across the industry. The market leaders have been for quite a while the kind of top three: RingCentral, 8x8, and Vonage. All three of those providers are global in nature. They also have contact center solutions as well. And they also edge into that SMS or messaging component as well, with some CPaaS, is the industry term, communications platform as a service, to kind of round out the multi-channel environment that way. But they've been market leaders for quite some time. The ones that are competing and growing very, very quickly into that market leader status are companies like Dialpad and Nextiva. Those two have all of those functionalities all balled into one. When you look at RingCentral and a Dialpad, they too have very aggressively tried to compete with the tools like Zoom, right? That got their big blast during COVID when everyone had to work from home. But we'll talk a little bit more about Zoom as well. And then you have this third category, which is really a more specialized approach. And so those are providers like Ooma or Net2Phone, GoTo, which used to be Jive, if anyone remembers them. They got acquired by GoToMeetings. So you have Jive that was really heavy in the education space, and then GoToMeetings that was really good in IT support because of their unique screen share capabilities. Those folks came together as one as well, but really get very verticalized in regards to industry. And Call Harbor, which some of you will know, is more local Michigan provider as well. So when we look at Ooma, they do quite a bit of POTS line replacement work and work really well in the hospitality space because of that. Because if you think about all the different rooms in a hotel or hospitality situation, they can really consolidate those efforts and then also provide that UCaaS system with some light call center functionality on the top as well. And then folks like Net2Phone, not as widely known, but a good provider that does some different routes to market in regards to their commercials or pricing structure. They do some concurrent modeling versus the per seat modeling that really got its start when UCaaS became popular, right? So we went from how many trunks do I need to how many users do I have on the platform? So they kind of cross-pollinate in that, and then also play really well in the dealership space sometimes too. So more specialized in nature. But that's a snapshot. Again, not all encompassing, not an exhaustive list of all the UCaaS providers, but the big ones that we see a lot of activity with in the market.
Hey, Thea, question for you. I see you have the three categories about those that connect, or what about those that connect or play well together? So, for example, connecting into Salesforce or APIs or things like that. Does that blur the line with these categories?
It does, but I think many times, unless you're having something that's pretty specialized, whether it's industry specific or something homegrown, you're really going to see a very similar list of pre-built integrations. I would say that 5 to 7 years ago, that might have been a big differentiator between different providers here. But depending on what you're looking for, it's definitely a consideration that you should make. When you talk about RingCentral, ServiceNow, HubSpot, things like that, Zoho, Dynamics, those are big names in the industry, and providers have really spent money to integrate there. When you talk about more specialized solutions, like in the dealership space, VIN Solutions, Net2Phone, and Vonage, those are some of the providers that can integrate only with those as well. GoTo is another one there. Yeah. So depending on how industry specific you are, in the healthcare space, for example, some of these integrations take and cost money for the providers to maintain. So they need to make sure that they play enough in that industry space to validate, like integrating with an Epic or a Cerner from a healthcare perspective. Does that help?
Yeah. Great. Yeah. Perfect.
Awesome. Great question. When we look at the market adoption comparison, I always like to talk about, what are the Joneses doing? Everyone wants to know, what is everyone else doing and where do these providers really play well in the space? So out of the ones that I just mentioned, there's kind of a differential between who plays up market in the enterprise space versus who plays in that SMB mid-market space. And it doesn't mean that one is a bad fit because it's higher up in the kind of Fortune 100, Fortune 2, 3, 400 companies. But it does tend to be a bit of a different feel sometimes where they play. It's where their teams are allocated. Are they organized from a back end and support infrastructure perspective to say, okay, if I'm doing an SMB or mid-market play, and they're going to need more support from me, they don't have a giant IT staff to support this. Maybe they'll need us as a provider to do all the implementation. It's kind of nice to see this side by side to say, companies like Net to Phone are very, very hands-on, very, very white glove because they don't do as much enterprise business. They do much more SMB business. Nextiva, same, very white glove experience there. Uma is much more down market. RingCentral is, of course, one of the leaders. You see those top 3 leaders. That's why they're the leaders in this space. They really play very well with both because they have different go-to market strategies from a sales and support perspective in both buckets. All right, the next category of UCaaS players are those yes and providers that we see here. So we see folks utilizing companies like this for UCaaS when they want to consolidate procurement, right? I want to have one-stop shop go-tos for some reason. So maybe I have my local LEC, Verizon, Lumen, AT&T, my local cable provider, Comcast, Spectrum, you name it. They're going to bring to the table a UCaaS solution for you as well. A lot of times they will have a Teams option or a Zoom option from a collaboration perspective, or they'll resell something like WebEx, right, or BroadSoft. So or even RingCentral. So you'll be able to get some kind of flavor there. Now, sometimes they'll have multiple variety options for you to choose from as well. And sometimes they'll have some homegrown solutions like built on an Asterisk-based server or an open source model like that, or a Metaswitch platform. But this is another route to market. A lot of times when we see companies that need voice but aren't super focused on voice based on how you go to market and do business, we see this just being a yes and thing. Yes, I need something. I don't want to have a separate provider for it. I'd like to have a single bill, but I don't put a lot of clout on the voice technology. Maybe I don't need a lot of contact center functionality, and my folks aren't heavy users. That's where we see people going to these yes and providers, but definitely an option. What we see the most of is the collaboration players, like I said. So what is already in place? What are you already using? Are you a Microsoft shop? Are you a Cisco shop? Do you have Zoom? Many times there's a combination of these. I mean, very rarely do we get in a situation where you only have one collaboration player. A lot of folks have Zoom for presentations like this as they excel in that presentation webinar space. Many people have WebEx because Cisco purchased BroadSoft, which is probably the biggest UCaaS player on the market, a long time ago, and made that WebEx calling. They smartly enabled their collaboration tool with that BroadSoft backend from a Cisco perspective. And of course, we're going to talk at a great length today about Teams voice, because there's the most color and options around how you can procure and utilize Teams voice. And there's differences based on how folks go to market with that. So let's dive in here. I also did a market adoption comparison here just to give you a lay of the land. Teams is by far exceeding. Cisco WebEx tends to be more in the enterprise than SMB space because call managers are normally supporting higher mid-market to low enterprise accounts. And once you're a Cisco shop and you have all that Cisco expertise, many times they just lean into a WebEx solution. Microsoft Teams, though, is such a namesake in this space because of their entire suite of services, their entire Office suite, how dependent Microsoft users really are on Microsoft. The fact that they just threw in Teams free of charge, I will say, air quotes, free of charge, in their offering in licensing, makes it a very easy route to market when you talk about voice enabling it, which is why we see so much traction and so much consolidation in that space. Now, Zoom Phone has a smaller market share here, but you have to realize that Zoom Phone is more recent than either of those other two, because when you're a Cisco shop, a lot of times you're a Cisco shop. When you're a Microsoft shop, you're a Microsoft shop. Zoom came out in the pandemic, very easy to use, very video conferencing focused. they have expanded quite a bit in the industry and are growing very quickly. Really not a huge differential between whether it's enterprise or SMB adoption. They do a good job in both spaces. So when we look at Zoom Phone as an option, again, their capabilities around feature functionality, their enhancements in the contact center space, their bolt-ons and additions in the AI space is pretty impressive, and it's moving at a very, very fast clip. They're getting more upmarket. Now, the thing is if you don't already have Zoom, you have to have Zoom as a baseline collaboration tool in some capacity to make this work. So sometimes people look at Zoom Phone as, or Zoom One is what they're calling it now, as kind of the same experience as integrating a new UCaaS player. Sometimes that is a new application on the desktop for people. So you don't get that adoption, that seamless adoption, like leaning into something that folks are already using and familiar with from a UI perspective. But again, very good provider. If we were comparing the three collaboration providers from a technology perspective, I would say Zoom is quickly, passing up Microsoft and Cisco in this. But sometimes a heavier lift, so you don't get that collaboration benefit.
And Thea, a follow-up at that is, would Zoom be at a higher price point because they're more robust for features as opposed to the others?
They have options there, but they love to bundle. So yes, I do see side by side it being more expensive. The other two offer more of that concurrent call model, or like the legacy trunking model that folks are used to when moving from a premises-based PBX. So that a lot of times, based on how much less we use the phones today than digital communication, a lot of times that becomes more cost effective, whereas Zoom is always going to be per user based. And so sometimes that's a detriment cost wise. That's a great point. So when we look at WebEx, they have their own ecosystem, much like what Teams and Microsoft has created, where they've partnered with certain voice providers in the industry to say you can and you are certified or integrated at a deeper level to provide trunking to the WebEx platform. So the players you see here are many times not the player that you will buy WebEx licensing from. If you're a WebEx user, again, you're a Cisco shop, you already have a Cisco VAR or direct relationship, and that WebEx licensing from a software perspective normally comes from them. But you then have to enable it for voice, and these are the players that play in that space. They have a restricted list of providers that are able to offer voice services to their platform. Much smaller than the Teams ecosystem. But these are some of the WebEx calling partners that are available in the space. And again, you can do this in a concurrent call modeling option. You'll pay Cisco on a per license fee for the WebEx functionality, and then a concurrent model for the trunking to enable voice on that system. They have been I will say, WebEx has been the slowest to market going UCaaS. They hung on to their prem solutions and put a lot of money and energy into their prem solutions ahead of really moving into the UCaaS space. Again, they made that acquisition of BroadSoft, but they didn't do much with it right away. Now they're building out their WebEx contact center, and that too is kind of lagging because everyone else has been doing contact center as a service functionality for so much longer. And then the last thing I'll say about Cisco WebEx is it tends to be a more closed platform. They have integrations, but not as widely available. And if you needed a custom integration, it can become a heavier lift on your side of the house as well as theirs to get that connected. All right. We're going to spend some time on Teams Voice now, because we're really kind of saying, what's the landscape of the UCaaS space? What else is out there? And why would I consider these options versus why would I consider Microsoft Teams? Now, when I talk to clients, and I'd love to hear any other opinion here, when I talk to clients about Teams Voice, it's really just voice. It's certainly not a call center or contact center solution. If it's Microsoft Teams Voice, they don't have heavy lift on contact center. They just have call center, maybe a few queues, not a bunch of reporting functionality, and not multi-channel or omni-channel requirements. Or they have a larger contact center space where they're going to a contact center only provider that doesn't have UC options, and they just need to pull along the rest of the users that are in the back office that need some sort of voice connectivity. Those are the scenarios where I see Microsoft Teams really playing ball. Now, in order to voice enable Microsoft Teams, there are 4 options, 4 categories here. Microsoft has their own calling plans, and we'll talk about that. You can buy a calling plan and enable your voice services directly from Microsoft and pay Microsoft for that. You could do a UCaaS integration, right? And there's a couple of different options here. We'll talk about that, but those are the UCaaS players that we've talked about, mostly the pure play providers that also integrate to Teams from an interface perspective to try to consolidate the UIs and applications that your end users are forced to interface with. There are 2 flavors of direct routing that we'll talk about, actually probably a third. And then the newest option to connect voice to Microsoft Teams is Operator Connect. And that's much more the model that WebEx has used with their certified providers. So this is a different level of integration. We'll talk about this again, but different level of an integration between the provider of voice and Microsoft directly. So there's some nuances there as well. So let's get into talking about the differences here. So we talked about native calling plans. So you need 2 elements to enable Teams for voice. You need the phone system license, which is essentially just software and not natively enabled for calling. And then you need a calling plan. In this scenario, you can buy that calling plan from Microsoft. Now, when you look at a lot of customers have E1 or E3 licensing, there is no phone system license inclusive of that model. And so you would need to add on a phone system, a Teams phone standard license. $8 is rack rate. So if you get a discount through them or your provider of Microsoft licensing, that would apply here. These are all rack rate prices. You would need to add on the Teams phone standard license to even have an option to enable for voice. But it's always going to be twofold in all of these situations. In order to enable, you need the phone standard license, not inclusive of E1 or E3. The E5 license is a much more expensive license, but it does include the phone standard license as well. Now, you're not going to go E5 just for phone standard. It's more cost effective to add on that single license, that $8 license, to an E1, E3 license, or whatever letter goes in front of your specific licensing, but a 1 or a 3. E5 is really with folks that are wanting to take advantage of the Microsoft Security Suite. And so that would be the reason to go E5. And a benefit to that is that it includes that phone system license, if that makes sense. When we look at calling plans, they range from $12 to $15 for domestic calling. When you bundle that with the phone system license, it can be a little cheaper. So I could do 8 plus 12 for 20, but I could do 15 for a bundled route through Microsoft. There's also a license called the Common Area Phone System license that is applicable for people who don't actually unnamed users on the system. So if you have a break room phone, for example, they have a solution for that as well. Basically, what we're doing here is we're allowing Microsoft to be the PSTN provider. They do have international coverage, but they're not designed to be a voice provider. Voice is a whole different animal. And so we don't see folks using this calling option because of the sheer lack of access and support and knowledge that Microsoft has in this space. If it's really something that you need to bundle, great. If you have like 2, 3, 4, 5 users, maybe, but it's not a great go-to-market plan. For example, the LNP, which is local number portability team, is an email distribution list. So maybe if you're getting net new numbers and you don't have to go through a port, great. But if my numbers are being ported, my business numbers being ported from one place to another, and I don't have anyone I can call, there's no phone number to call, that's a problem. I also think, again, my own professional opinion here, that as Microsoft realized this, they then started opening up different abilities for other providers that are core voice providers to start integrating into their system and being the provider of voice. And that's where we saw direct routing and Operator Connect be born. So I think that they too are saying, hey, if you want any kind of support around this, don't come to us. And so many times that becomes a deterrent from a business perspective, but it is available as an option. Now, there are folks out there that want to not buy the phone system license. They say, hey, that doesn't make this very cost effective for me. I don't want to do that. But I do want my users to live in the Teams environment. So this is also an option in the market, the Teams plugin option. Now, this is not enabling Teams for voice. It is enabling whatever UCaaS provider you've chosen to be a side-loaded application within your Teams environment. So now when you click in this example, Dialpad, Ring Central, Vonage, 8x8, many of those pure play UCaaS players have available options here. But it's essentially almost, if you know what an iframe is, it's like a phone inside an application, right? You're not using the native dialer of Microsoft Teams. You're using a side-loaded application, which is using WebRTC, which is internet voice technology, essentially. So in this situation, though, you could also have a dial pad that has a higher degree of contact center functionality. They're much more robust, but still live within the Teams environment from a consolidation of applications, and not have to buy that phone system license as well. This is also going to give you additional functionality when you're playing with a UCaaS provider, like SMS or texting, transcription. There wasn't contact center, but now slowly folks are implementing some contact center functionality here as well. Now, when we look at inbound calls, when we talk about user adoption and user experience, things to note here. Sure, I save money on the phone system license through Teams, but I'm telling my users to use Teams, but it's not native to Teams. So when you think about an inbound call, it's going to ring into the provider's side-loaded application, but it won't deter your screen all the time like a true Teams call would. And it'll notify you in Teams, but as a side-loaded application, not as a native client. And so there is some presence sharing integration that happens on the UCaaS provider and the team side, but sometimes that can get a bit messy. Subsequently, if you have like a common area phone or something, someone is not using any kind of functionality on this system, that presence sharing won't be there. So it can be a little bit kludgy, but it is sometimes a more cost-effective option for folks that want their users to live in the Teams environment.
So, Thea, if I could just ask a question, it sounds like you need to be a little bit more savvy as you're determining. For example, I've seen Teams can integrate with Mitel. They have My Voice that goes on top of the computer. But not all these features or plugs in work because it seems like a lot of people are now going to cellular. They just say, I don't want a desk phone anymore. So you really need to understand what you're getting as it integrates with Teams or that plugin. Is that right?
Yes, that's a great call out there. I believe all the UCaaS providers have gotten to a point with their Teams integration that it would be mobile applicable as well. It's just so many more clicks to get to it because it's not native, you know, which makes it
Yep.
trickier. So it really depends on the application. You have to really, it has to really make sense to do this Teams plugin option. This was much more popular, I would say 6 to 8 years ago than it is today. It's just the integrations have evolved, but it is an available option that you can purchase from a lot of those pure play providers. A lot of considerations to make though. You really need to spend time on the demo and maybe do a POC with folks so that you really know what your end users are going to get into. Because if I'm buying this, it may be more advantageous just to switch to the UI of the UCaaS provider themselves, right? There may be more benefit there because they probably have a collaboration tool as well. So it's a bit redundant in my opinion.
Yep. Thanks.
Of course. All right, the next option is going to be, let's see how we're doing on time, pretty good. The next option is direct routing through a UCaaS provider. So as opposed to doing just the plugin where I'm just buying a UCaaS seat and I'm putting a side-loaded application into Teams, this assumes that you do have a phone system license in your Teams environment. So again, I have to have that phone system license, and now I'm enabling that for voice and native calling through my Teams client. Now, what the UCaaS providers do predominantly is they will use a middleware company. Most of them use QUnify. It's a call to Teams thing, because at the beginning, you had to have a specialized SBC or session border controller technology at your core to integrate into Teams, because they had specifications around integration and testing that they had done with only certain brand providers. So you have these dial pads and net2phones and Nextivas that have their own infrastructure, and maybe that didn't match up. So this was a way to gain access earlier on. Now, in this situation, when you enable Teams Phone, you also enable things like voicemail and on Microsoft, and you have access to auto attendants and call groups on Microsoft. That doesn't work well. Again, you're forcing a bit of redundancy here. So you really need to pick one. So the UCaaS provider in this situation really wants to be that primary, because if I own the call and it just rings into Teams, and I can own the voicemail and the voicemail to email, I can own the auto attendant or the IVR on the front end, I own the hunt groups and all the presence. Only one person can really own that. So the redundancy of this gets a bit messy. When UCaaS providers look at direct routing, they see Teams as an endpoint only, almost like a device, like a phone or a soft phone. Those soft phones, whether they're mobile or desktop, or even a Teams physical device, those register directly to Microsoft's cloud. They don't register to the UCaaS provider. Now, if I have a phone outside of that that is not Teams firmware and it is an open source firmware, that will register directly to the UCaaS provider's cloud. So you notice that there can be some discrepancy on presence there and presence sharing. Whereas no internal Teams to Teams call hits that UCaaS provider. So if I call Dan Teams to Teams, I can't see that those people are on a phone call. Or if I'm doing any call reporting or CDR data from the UCaaS provider, that call did never happen to them because it doesn't cross the integration path. It's just registered directly to that Microsoft cloud. So this was very popular again at the beginning, and this still is offered today, but less popular because it gets a bit redundant again and a bit kludgy. Any questions on that? Not so far. Okay. Then we came in and said, okay, I can do direct routing as a provider that is non-Microsoft, and I now have that approved SBC in my own network. And I'm going to use that in a multi-tenant fashion, much like UCaaS, so that I'm not saying, customer, you have to buy this SBC and I'm going to host it for you. But no, I have SBC redundant infrastructure. And that is going to use a super SIP trunk to connect into Microsoft because it's an approved model and I can work with Microsoft. In this instance, we take the phone system functionality like voicemail, auto attendance, call groups, and we fully transition that over to the Microsoft Teams phone system. That cleans things up a bit, right? Because now I don't have the redundancy of that. I am just a SIP trunk provider for the Microsoft Teams PBX or phone system. Okay. Now, there will still be ancillary things that are connected directly to that provider cloud sometimes. Maybe that is a local SBC that also connects into your premises-based system. You see that option here. So you could do that as well. And then you can create that 4-digit dialing between a Teams user and your premises-based system. Or maybe there's some analog requirements, fax, emergency, things like that need to be provided via ATA. You could do that off of the provider cloud as well. Teams has also accounted for that and now will allow those devices to register directly to their cloud to kind of clean that piece up as well. This has evolved over the years, but it is an option to register that directly. The far upper left there, that in-country provider, many times, if you're a global organization, you need to have this SBC as a service infrastructure just because you need to be localized and it's a requirement in country. That may or may not apply to any folks on the call today. So that's a second option. So first one is direct routing with this middleman. The next one is I'm doing direct routing, but with my own SBCs. And now I have the consolidation of PBX functionality all with one provider, no redundancy. And then the other option is to do it yourself. You know, that last option was the provider providing you an SBC as a service. You could also buy that approved audio codes SBC, Ribbon, ThinkTel, Oracle, Metaswitch. There's more. I can buy an SBC that is Teams compatible, and I can host that myself, either self-host on my prem or in the cloud. And I can do that myself, right? At that point, I am just going to the provider and I'm saying, I need connectivity to my SBC. It's just bringing the SBC in-house and owning it yourself. So some customers will prefer that as well from an infrastructure perspective, management, access. They don't want to be multi-tenant on their SBC for some reason, but that is the third direct routing configuration option that's available to you. All right. From there, we go to the most modern way of doing things. This is what Microsoft rolled out and said, okay, so I have approved SBCs, but let's just say we can do a non-SBC solution. Let's remove the requirement for that hardware. So SBC as a service, or the SBC in general on the customer side or provider side, is no longer required. And now these providers that you see here, and there's a larger list of them as well, are now directly peered with Microsoft using what Microsoft refers to as MAPS, or the Microsoft Azure Peering Service. They have to go through a process and do custom integration work platform to platform to make this work. So they will be listed in Microsoft as Operator Connect providers. Now, the benefit of this is I no longer have a device that can fail, right? I have a direct peering relationship cloud to cloud, which is fantastic. But the last thing you'll see moved over to the Teams cloud here. If you look back here, the phone numbers in the SBC are still in the provider cloud. You only have PBX features in the Teams cloud. Operator Connect brings those phone numbers over to Teams. So now I'm not logging into two portals to manage my phone numbers and manage my Teams phone system features. I now can go to Teams admin, and I can go and control my entire phone system as well as the phone numbers that come in there. The difference in this is, in order to set up, and this may get a bit technical, but I think it matters, especially if there's anyone who's managing Microsoft or is the super admin of Microsoft. In the direct routing situation, in order to establish that connection and build a user out, I need admin access, like the highest level of admin access to the Microsoft tenant, not just Teams, the Microsoft tenant. In this situation, I can now give access just to the Teams admin, and they can manage all of the phone system functionality. And so you don't need PowerShell. It's all API based. All your phone numbers live in the Teams admin center, and I don't need additional higher level function access into the Microsoft environment. And then there's also something called a graph API. So recording is kind of, this is kind of a nuance, but if you wanted to add in recording, certain providers need access to the graph API to do that as well. But this is the cleanest solution. From an access level and management in-house, you need less access to Microsoft. And now all of my things, again, are living in one space. Any questions on how this has changed and evolved throughout the years?
Nope.
Okay. Now there is one other option, and that is the mobile option. Right now in the US, only Verizon has gotten to this status with Microsoft at this point in time. This is where calling becomes native to your mobile device and is seamlessly escalated and integrated into a desktop environment, whether you're on your soft phone on your desktop or you're on a physical Teams device. Now, this requires you to purchase new business SIM cards through Verizon. So if you're a Verizon subscriber already from a business mobile perspective, you could do that. But we can't port into this scenario either. But some folks really have an applicable use case for this, where you are natively mobile and integrated to Teams at the same time. All of these things, again, are managed directly through the Teams Admin Center because it is an Operator Connect model. And again, only Verizon is available here, but I wanted to make sure that you were aware of this, just in case there's an applicable use case for you.
So it sounds like if you want to go down this route, you can't have an unlocked phone. It just has to stay with that carrier.
It does. Yep. It has to be Verizon. It has to be a Verizon SIM. Yep. Absolutely. It's very true. We don't see a lot of people taking advantage of this, but it is available. It's more common, as you can see, internationally than it has become here. I think when more mobile providers gain access to this, if they pursue it, we might see a spike in functionality, because I feel like that's the tale as old as time, is how do I get native cell phone functionality integrated and driven into the business? Folks,
Right.
real good salespeople are always going to bring their own clients, right? But you don't want them to take them to the next place either. So it's
Hmm.
been a long-term conundrum in the industry for sure.
Hmm.
All right. So those are all the flavors of Microsoft Teams. Now, I'm going to kind of wrap this up with some things to consider. And we've talked about those throughout our time together today, but I'm just going to reiterate here. So when you look at user adoption, you can see all the crazy bells and whistles of these pure play UCaaS providers. They do so much and it's so cool. But if your users are already living in a Teams environment, that user adoption and interface familiarity is going to be awesome for your change management and adoption. Also, we talked about integrations, right? So when you look at Teams specifically, there's not a ton of integrations. It's a Microsoft play. A lot of people will integrate to Teams, but Teams doesn't try and integrate to other things like CRM or productivity tools. And so if you really have a requirement to live in Salesforce, to live in Dynamics, to live in HubSpot, you may want to go with a UCaaS provider in that situation. Vendor stability is a big deal as well. So there's a ton of market consolidation that's continuing to happen. Um, you're going to want to talk to people like Dan, right? In this situation, he knows what the industry looks like. And so knowing where providers are headed and what their financially backing, what their financial backing is and what their long-term roadmap strategy is really important. We're seeing a lot of transition with Nextiva happening right now too, as they're making a platform change, and that can affect customers that are adopting that technology now. Compliance and security too. If you're in a certain industry that has specified compliance and security requirements, start there and let that filter the space for you. HIPAA, PCI, high trust, whatever that might be for you, PII information in general. Make sure you're checking into that with the providers that are available on the market. Very easy to see who can do what there in that path. And then lastly, do you have a call center? Will you have a contact center? And what are those capabilities going to expand into? The UCaaS pure play providers all have very robust call and contact center platforms available to you to grow into, whereas Teams will probably stay in that call queue basis without a lot of reportability functions. So that might be another reason to consider the UCaaS solution over a Teams voice option. The other thing I will say is during the pandemic, a lot of people had buyer's remorse. They rushed into these decisions. There was a lot of new providers in the space. So we really need to talk to folks that know subjective information, not just the technology checkboxes, a feature functionality. It really matters how they've been performing after the fact, how they implement, how they support. We talked about that on enterprise versus SMB support as well. Knowing those things really arm you with the right decision-making capability. Make sure you're asking about surcharges and fees. Those differ per provider based on how they're registered. If they're pure play cloud providers, if they're telephony providers on the LEC level, that could change as well. So ask for examples of those as well. Again, with the security protocols, with your industry requirements, and then consider integration and consolidation. Most of us have at least 3 to 5 separate communication tools in our organization. Think about how to consolidate that best, because you're going to get most user adoption and benefit out of a new solution if you can consolidate as much as humanly possible. So really just take a look at all these different components when you're considering what option works best for you. All right, we're doing okay on time. We have about 10 minutes left if anyone else has any questions at all, or even comments and feedback.
Oh, what you've talked a lot about the UCaaS place. Are
Mm-hmm.
you seeing, because I think from Abilita, we've seen there's been a huge migration from the premise base to the UCaaS or similar. And I think we would have said years ago, it's just not that price point, at least for our clientele, my clientele for that. Are you continuing to see that this is taking huge chunks out of the share for the premise-based equipment, and how are they adapting to this? Because it seems like you kind of have to dance with Teams or the UCaaS providers. You see Mitel and Zoom or Teams and fill in the blank. Do you feel like you can talk on that subject?
Yeah. So from a cost perspective, it was really hard. I think that larger organizations, especially, were seeing a very hard ROI on saying, okay, I have, 500 seats and I have 24 trunks at this point in time. How can I justify that cost? And so I think that what's happened is as we evolved through the pandemic, a lot of folks realized that they didn't need desk phones anymore. And so a lot of folks that are now still on the prem solutions are transitioning, but smartly. And a lot
Hmm.
of the UCaaS providers and teams in general have gotten smarter about making that cost effective and making that ROI driven. If you're going Teams, sure, everyone already has Teams and Teams Phone, but maybe not everyone needs the Teams Phone license because I still have internal collaboration and calling as well as meetings without that license. And I can also do concurrent trunking now to Teams. So that becomes a very cost effective solution for people. And that has evolved since the start of UCaaS. If there's additional requirements on the contact center space, that teams can't offer, that's a different conversation. And so many times we see those being UCaaS players because of the functionality. That's actually revenue driven, right? I'm generating more business because of that functionality based on how I go to market. So those two considerations have made it much more accessible from a pricing
Hmm.
perspective, moving from prem to cloud.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Thea, for your time and sharing your expertise today. And I think everyone, please follow up with your Abilita consultant if you have any follow-up questions or if you'd like a copy of the slide deck, especially if the last 45 minutes was like drinking from a fire hydrant for you. Um, so, the whole point of these webinars from Abilita is to help everyone get a little bit smarter about the issue, the industry, the solutions. It's always changing. So hopefully this was helpful for you. And our next webinar is going to be in August, and we hope that you can join us then. So thanks, everybody. And thanks again, Thea.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate your time,
Bye.
everyone.